I invite you to listen to my new dramatic story about military honor, betrayal, and just retribution on the Purple Heart Stories channel. I'm sure it won't disappoint. And please support with a like and subscription if you enjoy it. Chapter 1: The Colors of Truth. My name is Jason Murphy, 42, former SEAL Team 6 operator, now a survival instructor with a reputation as someone who can teach you to stay alive even in hell. My wife Christina, 36, transforms wealthy people's naked bodies into living works of art with her paints and incredible talent. We were happy. Until I overheard that conversation at the festival where I'd gone to surprise her and learned about artist Chris's special services. Allow me to tell you how the colors of truth blurred the boundaries of the world I lived in. At 5:30 the alarm went off. Without opening my eyes, I turned it off 0.3 seconds before the first signal. 14 years in the Marines taught me to feel time as acutely as a snake feels the heat of its prey. Christina was asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, her dark hair with purple streaks spread across the pillow like an ink stain. I didn't wake her. She had returned late yesterday, another private commission of the kind that had been paying our bills for 3 years now. Silently sliding out of bed, I performed my habitual ritual: 40 push-ups, 40 squats, 40 crunches. Simple arithmetic of survival: keep your body in shape, and it won't fail you when you need to run or fight. In Kandahar, I saw well-prepared guys freeze under fire. In Mosul, I observed the strongest fighters break due to minor mistakes. My body is a weapon I never surrendered, even after retirement. Shower, hot water, then ice cold. I rubbed my neck with a towel, inhaling the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. So Christina was awake after all. She always sensed when I finished my workout, as if an invisible connection linked our bodies. "Good morning, Jay." Her voice sounded soft, like the silk rope I used for boarding drills. "Morning." I kissed her temple, inhaling the aroma of her hair mixed with the smell of acrylic paints that seemed to have permanently embedded into her skin. Christina handed me a mug, black coffee, no sugar. "I got a call from the festival today." She sipped her coffee with milk, leaving a perfect purple crescent from her lipstick on the edge of the cup. "They want me to conduct a workshop instead of Jennings. He's having some visa issues." "Festival?" I leaned against the kitchen table, watching as she sliced a grapefruit into thin wedges. Her hands moved with surgical precision, the knife gliding through the pulp without leaving a single drop of juice on the cutting board. "Chromosphere, that 3-day body art festival in Wilmington." Christina raised her eyes, and for a moment I thought her pupils dilated a bit more than necessary. "I told you about it. It's a huge opportunity. All the best artists from the East Coast will be there." I nodded, though I didn't remember any conversations about a festival. However, I had been completely immersed for the past few weeks in preparing for an expedition with a group of corporate clients, bankers who paid me absurd money to teach them how to survive in the wilderness. As if the ability to start a fire without matches or distinguish edible roots from poisonous ones could become anything more than a topic for cocktail party conversation. 3 days. I sipped my coffee, feeling the caffeine remove the last traces of sleepiness. "Is this the exhibition where you met Senator Holdridge?" "No, that was a different one." Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "That was in Chicago, and this is in Delaware. More intimate but prestigious. Plus the fee is very generous." I remained silent. We never discussed her clientele directly, an unspoken rule established from the moment her career as a body art artist took off. Christina painted the bodies of businessmen, politicians, and their wives, creating artworks on their skin inaccessible to ordinary mortals. I knew she often worked with nude models and learned not to react to it. After all, I frequently saw naked bodies myself, dead, wounded, bleeding. A body is just a tool. What matters is what you do with it. "When do you leave?" I asked, placing my empty cup in the sink. "This afternoon." Christina approached and embraced my waist, pressing her cheek against my chest. "I'll be back Sunday evening. Will you manage without me? I smiled, kissing the top of her head. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. A woman asking a former Special Forces soldier if he could handle being alone for 3 days. I'll try not to starve, I joked, knowing that was exactly the response she expected. Working with civilians always reminded me of establishing contact missions in remote Afghan villages. The same need to simplify complex matters, the same frustration watching people make obvious mistakes, the same constant translation from professional language to amateur. Mr. Burns, if you hold the knife with a reverse grip for whittling steaks one more time, you'll lose your fingers. My voice was calm, but the group immediately fell silent. They had already learned that when Jason Murphy speaks quietly, it's best to listen particularly carefully. Robert Burns, a 45-year-old Wall Street CFO, blushed like a first-year cadet. His well-groomed hands, accustomed only to keyboards and expensive leather steering wheels, awkwardly held the tactical knife I had issued them for training. A real combat tool, not those toys from outdoor stores typically sold to tourists. "Sorry, instructor," he mumbled, adjusting his grip correctly. "Like this." I nodded and shifted my gaze to the other participants. 8 people, financiers, lawyers, one economics professor from Princeton, all paying my company, Survival Instinct, more than the cost of an average car for a week-long course in basic wilderness survival skills. 13 years ago, I taught Marines to survive in conditions where they were hunted by the Taliban. Now I taught the wealthy how not to die from dehydration, a couple of hours' walk from the nearest 5-star hotel. "We'll finish for today," I announced as the sun began to set. "Tomorrow at dawn, orientation training and fishing with bare hands." Burns groaned, but the others took the news stoically. They had already realized that complaining only extended the training. I gathered the equipment and sent the group to camp while staying behind to check the perimeter. An old habit that once saved my life in places where even the air was saturated with danger. Returning to camp, I saw a message from Christina. "Arrived safely. Festival is amazing. First workshop tomorrow. Love you, kisses." Concise, as always. We both disliked wasting words. In a world where people drown in meaningless information, the ability to say only what's necessary was a rare quality I appreciated in her. I replied, "Good luck, be careful." Then, after thinking, added, "Love you." I'm not one to easily express feelings, but Christina deserved those words. She never asked about my missions, never demanded details about the scars on my body, never woke in panic when I silently jumped out of bed in the middle of the night, pursued by ghosts of the past. The next morning, we were practicing azimuth navigation when my phone vibrated. A call from Mike Turner, my former teammate, now working for a private security firm. I stepped away from the group. "Murphy," I answered. "Jay, how are your bankers? Haven't eaten each other in desperation yet." Mike's voice sounded cheerful, but with that special undertone I'd learned to recognize after years of joint operations. Something was wrong. Holding up so far, I took a few more steps, moving out of the group's earshot. "What's happened, Mike?" "Nothing urgent," he hesitated. "Just thought you should know. My firm is providing security for the Chromosphere Festival." My heart skipped a beat. And I found it strange that your wife is here and you didn't mention it." His voice grew quieter. "Jay, do you know what's going on there?" "Christina is conducting a workshop," I answered. "Some last-minute replacement." "Yes, a workshop." A pause. "And VIP parties after the official program." I felt something cold growing inside. The Special Forces instinct, a sixth sense developed through years of operations in combat zones, signaled danger. "What kind of parties?" My voice remained steady. "Control, always control." "Look, I didn't want to interfere in your business." Mike clearly felt uncomfortable. There's a restricted area here, very restricted. My guys provide security, but we're forbidden from entering. and your Christina is the main star there." "I see." I looked at my trainees, unsuccessfully trying to orient themselves with a compass. "Thanks for the information, Mike." "Don't do anything stupid, Jay," he warned. "These people are influential, and they have security." "I just want to surprise my wife," I said with an ease I didn't feel. "Attend her performance." Mike snorted. "Sure, I can arrange a pass for the general area, but beyond that, I'll handle the rest," I finished for him, like the good old days. After the call, I returned to the group, but my thoughts were already far away. Nothing strange about Christina participating in closed events for VIP clients. She often mentioned private commissions from celebrities who wanted to maintain anonymity, but something in Mike's voice made me wary. What exactly was happening in this very restricted zone? I ended the classes earlier than planned, citing family circumstances. No one objected. Burns even looked openly relieved. I handed the group over to my assistant and headed home to pack. Our house was quiet and empty without Christina. I went to the bedroom, knelt by the bed, and pulled out an old military trunk from underneath. Fingerprint, then a 12-digit code. Inside lay everything I left behind when I returned to civilian life. Almost everything. I took out a set of clothes for covert surveillance. Black tactical pants with multiple pockets, a dark shirt made of non-reflective material, lightweight boots with special soles for silent movement. Then a small kit with basic tools that might be useful for infiltrating a secured area. Looking at these items, I felt a familiar tingling in my fingertips. Adrenaline. The body remembered. The body always remembers. Wilmington greeted me with drizzling rain. I rented an inconspicuous black sedan and parked a block away from the exhibition center where the festival was taking place. I checked the time, 19:32. According to the program I found online, the official part ended at 20:00, after which special events for accredited participants began. I called Mike. "In position," I reported briefly. "South entrance guard with a red beard, say you're from me. Name John Reed." "Got it," I smiled involuntarily. "John Reed, our code name for operations requiring special delicacy." Waiting for dusk to fall, I headed to the south entrance. The festival grounds were enclosed by a temporary fence, with security guards in black uniforms bearing Mike's company logo at each entrance. The red-bearded man scrutinized me when I gave my fake name. "Turner warned me." He handed me a badge labeled Technical Staff. "General area only. Hall B is off limits." I nodded with a look of complete understanding and went inside. The exhibition center buzzed like a beehive. Hundreds of people moved from booth to booth, examining photographs of body artworks and live exhibits, models with artfully painted bodies. Some compositions were striking in their complexity: animals, landscapes, abstract patterns transforming the human body into a canvas for incredible illusions. I moved slowly along the perimeter, observing and memorizing the locations of cameras, security, emergency exits. Old habits die hard. There was no trace of Christina anywhere, but I didn't expect to see her in the general area, based on Mike's words. Hall B was in the far wing of the building. As I approached, people became fewer and security more abundant. At an inconspicuous door with the letter B stood two guards dressed more formally than the others, with communication earpieces. They admitted only those presenting a special black badge. I stepped aside, pretending to study exhibited photographs of last year's festival winners. Among them was Christina's work, a naked female back painted as phoenix wings, with such detail that it seemed the feathers might burst into real flames at any moment. The jury awarded her second place. I remembered how disappointed she was, considering her work to be the best. "Magnificent, isn't it?" A deep voice with a slight accent sounded beside me. I turned. Next to me stood a tall man in his 50s in an immaculate gray suit. His graying hair was slicked back, revealing a high forehead with receding hairline. Blue eyes looked keenly, appraisingly. "Yes, impressive," I replied neutrally. "Chris outdid herself last year," he smiled, showing perfectly even teeth. "But what she's doing now eclipses even this." I tensed hearing him use my wife's shortened name, which only close friends used. "You know the artist?" I asked, maintaining a casual tone. "Oh, Chris and I are old friends," the man extended his hand. "Richard Weiss, collector." I shook his hand, nodding a slight tremor and too many rings. "John Reed, photographer." "Photographer," he raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall your name in the program." "I'm here unofficially," I shrugged slightly, "studying formats for future projects." Weiss nodded, but something in his gaze suggested he didn't believe me. However, instead of further questioning, he took a business card from his inner jacket pocket. "If you're interested in real art, Mr. Reed, come to this entrance at midnight." He pointed to an inconspicuous door at the end of the corridor, "not the one leading to Hall B. Say you're my guest." He turned and walked away, leaving me holding his card. There was nothing on it except the letter Chai and a QR code. Waiting was always the hardest part of an operation. I settled in a small cafe with a view of the entrance. Weiss had indicated and ordered coffee. Time dragged painfully slowly. 22:17, 22:43, 23:09. During this time, I scanned the QR code from the card. It led to a secure page with a single password entry form. No hints, no auxiliary information. Dead end. At 23:45, I left the cafe and slowly moved toward the indicated entrance. Drawing closer, I noticed it was guarded differently than Hall B. No obvious security here, just a camera above the door and a card reader. An expensive but discreet security system, for those in the know. At exactly midnight, I approached the door. The camera turned slightly in my direction. For a few seconds, nothing happened, then came a click, and the door opened slightly. From inside appeared a man in a dark suit with an earpiece. "Name?" he asked without greeting. "John Reed, from Mr. Weiss." He gave me a careful once-over, then nodded and stepped aside, letting me in. "Rules: no phones, no recording devices, no questions to the staff. Follow me." I complied, nodding that he didn't demand I surrender my phone, which meant somewhere along the way there would be a check for electronic devices. We walked down a narrow corridor, then descended a staircase to the level below. At the bottom of the stairs, we were met by another guard who silently extended a handheld scanner to me. As I had anticipated, I took out my phone, keys, and wallet, placing them in the offered basket. The scanner detected nothing suspicious. I hadn't brought weapons or bugs, knowing such precaution would be excessive. The guard returned my personal items and pointed to a dressing room. Change, inside only with masks. In the small room hung black silk robes on hangers and lay Venetian-style half-masks covering the upper part of the face. I chose a robe my size and a simple black mask. After changing, I came out to the guard, who was now also masked but in a dark red robe distinguishing him from guests. "Follow me," he said, "and remember the rules." We walked another short corridor, at the end of which was a massive door. The guard opened it with a key card, and we were enveloped by the muffled rumble of voices mixed with soft electronic music. In the spacious dark hall with high ceilings were about 50 people, all masked and in black robes. In the center was a circular platform illuminated by several soft spotlights. Around it, comfortable sofas and armchairs, behind which were separate alcoves, closed off by translucent curtains. I moved slowly along the wall, observing. People chatted, drank champagne served by masked waiters. At first glance, an ordinary social gathering, except for the masks and semi-naked bodies. Many guests opened their robes, displaying intricate designs on their skin. I noticed that the patterns differed in complexity and style, from simple geometric shapes to incredibly detailed compositions that changed color with movement. Your first time here. A short man with a glass in hand stopped beside me. It's noticeable in how you study the surroundings. Yes, I didn't deny the obvious. I was invited by Mr. Weiss. Oh, the curator himself, the man whistled. Then you should pay attention to the main event. It starts in a few minutes. Main event. Demonstration of the new collection. He raised his glass, pointing to the central platform. Madame Chris has outdone herself this time. They say she's created something revolutionary. My heart tightened in my chest. Madame Chris, my wife, here in this strange place among these people hiding their faces. What exactly is she demonstrating? I asked cautiously. The man leaned closer. Chromatic synchronization, he whispered almost reverently. They say her paints don't just change color from body heat anymore. They react and connect. He didn't get to explain further. The light in the hall dimmed even more. The music changed to something rhythmic, with hypnotic bass. A woman in a long purple hooded robe that concealed her face stepped onto the central platform. Even without seeing her, I knew it was Christina. By the way she moved, by the graceful tilt of her head, by the elegant gesture of her hand with which she greeted the gathered crowd. Welcome, dear friends. Her voice, amplified by a microphone, was soft, enveloping. Today I present to you my new creation, chromatic fusion. Art that doesn't just decorate the body but unites bodies in a shared experience. She paused, allowing the words to hang in the air. For the demonstration, I'll need 2 volunteers, a man and a woman not yet acquainted with each other. Several hands went up. Christina surveyed the hall and pointed to a young woman in the front row and an older man at the back of the hall. Please, she made an inviting gesture. The volunteers ascended the platform. At Christina's signal, they removed their robes, remaining naked but keeping their masks. 2 assistants in dark clothes led them to the center of the platform. Art connects us at a level deeper than words, deeper than thoughts, Christina continued, taking a small box from under the folds of her robe. What you are about to see is more than body art. It's a bridge between 2 people, physical, emotional, psychic. She opened the box, extracting something resembling a brush, but with an unusual metal tip. Chromatic fusion works through a special conductor that I call the access key. She showed the instrument, which I now recognized as a modified airbrush pen. This key will unlock the colors that connect. Christina approached the woman and began applying a pattern to her shoulder and arm. The paint glowed with an unnatural blue-violet light. After finishing with the woman, she moved to the man, applying a mirror pattern on the same body parts. Now, Christina stepped back, admiring her work. Touch each other with the painted areas. Just a touch, nothing more. The volunteers hesitantly drew closer, carefully making contact with their arms where the patterns were applied. At the moment of contact, something incredible happened. The paint on their bodies flashed brighter, changing color from violet to deep purple, pulsing in rhythm with heartbeats. The woman sharply inhaled, her eyes widening in surprise. The man froze, as if struck by an electric current. They remained in this pose, not breaking contact, and a whisper of admiration ran through the hall. They're feeling each other now, Christina explained. Not just touch, but emotions, sensations, even thoughts. Chromatic fusion creates a temporary neural link through the skin, intensifying everything they experience. Together. The volunteers began moving in sync, not breaking contact between the painted areas of their bodies. Their movements became increasingly fluid, intimate, as if they were performing a dance unknown to the rest of the world. And this is just the surface level of connection. Christina's voice became lower, more intimate. For those ready to dive deeper, Chromatic offers a special interaction. Full-body designs create a connection of such intensity that it cannot be described in words. She paused, scanning the silent hall with her gaze. Access to this experience requires a special invitation and special conditions. Those of you who are interested may contact the curator. I stood stunned by what I witnessed. What Christina was demonstrating transcended ordinary body art, transcended art in its traditional understanding. The paint on the volunteers' bodies continued to pulsate, and their movements became increasingly explicit, synchronized, as if they truly felt each other on some fundamental level. Impressive, isn't it? A voice behind me made me turn. Richard Weiss, the curator, stood nearby, observing my reaction. "What kind of technology is this?" I asked, trying to speak calmly, though inside I was boiling with questions. "Not technology, Mr. Reed. Art," Weiss smiled. "Madame Chris is a genius. She has created pigments that interact with the nervous system, enhancing tactile sensations and creating neural bridges between bearers of identical patterns." "Sounds unsafe," I remarked. "All things new raise concerns," he shrugged. "But the results speak for themselves. What you see is just a basic demonstration. For members of our chromatic club, Madame Chris creates much deeper connections." He paused, studying my reaction. "You're a photographer, correct, specializing in intimate photography?" I understood he was checking the legend I had presented to him. "Among other things," I answered evasively, "I'm interested in the boundaries of human experience." Weiss nodded with satisfaction. "Then you should see the true potential of this art. Follow me." He moved toward an inconspicuous door at the far end of the hall. I followed him, feeling anxiety growing inside. What else was my wife hiding? What was this chromatic club? The door led to a narrow corridor illuminated by subdued blue-violet light. We passed several locked rooms, from behind whose doors came muffled sounds, music, laughter, quiet moans. "Our club offers different levels of experience," explained Weiss, leading me further. "From simple sensory intensification to complete fusion of consciousnesses. It all depends on how deeply the client is ready to immerse." "And how much does such immersion cost?" I asked. "Oh, we don't take money in the conventional sense," he glanced over his shoulder at me. "Payment is in another form: information, connections, influence. Our currency is immaterial but no less valuable for that." We stopped before the last door. Weiss took out a key card and swiped it through the reader. "What you are about to see, Mr. Reed, is available only to the most trusted clients, or those who can become especially useful to our club." The door opened silently, and we entered a spacious room furnished as an artist's studio: easels, tables with paints, special lighting. But instead of canvases, there were people, naked men and women with fully painted bodies, connected to each other in strange, intimate poses. In the center of the room, with her back to us, stood Christina without mask or hood. She was working on a design on the body of a man lying on a special table. Another woman, already fully painted, stood nearby, awaiting her turn. "Madame Chris," called Weiss, "I've brought a new guest who has shown interest in your art." Christina slowly turned, and I saw her face, concentrated, with that special gleam in her eyes that appeared only in moments of creative inspiration. She smiled, and my breath caught. It was the smile of a stranger, cold and evaluating. "Welcome," she said, examining me closely. There was no hint of recognition in her eyes, the mask concealed enough that my own wife didn't recognize me. "What brings you to us?" "Curiosity," I answered, altering my voice, making it lower, slightly hoarse, "and the desire to understand what artist Chris's special services entail." Her eyes narrowed momentarily, then she laughed, quietly, melodiously. A laugh I'd heard thousands of times, but never with these notes of superiority and slight contempt. "Services, such a prosaic word for art." Christina set aside her brush and wiped her hands on a dark towel. "I create connections, bridges between people, channels for experiences that transcend the ordinary." She came closer, studying me through the mask slits. But the real question, mister, she paused. Reed, Weiss prompted. John Reed, photographer. Mr. Reed, Christina nodded. The real question isn't what brought you here, but whether you're ready for what you'll find. She extended her hand and touched my cheek with her fingertips, leaving a trace of paint that I felt as a slight tingling. Some secrets change us irreversibly, she whispered. Are you sure you want to know my special services, personally? At that moment, I overheard a fragment of conversation between two men who had entered the room after us. Artist Chris's special services are a true revelation, one of them said with a distinct British accent. My wife and I have never felt such unity as after a session with her chromatic technique. Yes, but I heard the real exclusive is her individual sessions, replied the second, lowering his voice. They say she uses brushes and paints in ways not even written about in the Kama Sutra. They laughed, not noticing how I froze, feeling the ground disappearing beneath my feet. My Christina, wasn't just painting clients' bodies, she. Well then, Mr. Reed, my wife's voice brought me back to reality. Would you like to experience the mastery of my special services firsthand? I looked into her eyes, the eyes of the woman I had lived with for 7 years, the eyes of a stranger whose existence I hadn't suspected until this moment. And I understood that I stood on the threshold of a discovery that would forever change our lives. Chapter 2: The Palette of Deception. Want to know how a special forces operator feels upon discovering that his wife uses clients' bodies as professional artistic canvases, and then offers them a very specific form of art therapy? Let me explain. Roughly like someone who thought they were jumping from a diving board into a pool, but landed in a shark tank. Except the sharks wear masks, drink champagne, and are willing to pay insane money for my wife to paint them in colors of an intimate rainbow spectrum. Mr. Reed, would you care for a refreshment? Christina handed me a glass of clear liquid. My special sessions require relaxation. She stood before me, my wife, who didn't know she was talking to her own husband. The absurdity of the situation hit me harder than the 120-kilogram Afghan fighter in Kandahar, who, by the way, missed. I didn't. With pleasure, I replied, altering my voice beyond recognition and taking the glass. Well, 7 years of special operations finally proved useful in married life. I pretended to drink, actually just letting the liquid touch my lips. Basic survival rule in a potentially hostile environment: never accept drinks from people who might want to drug you, even if those people are your own wife, especially if she doesn't know it's you. Come, I'll show you the real chromatic. Christina took my hand, and we moved through a secret door behind the studio. Richard Weiss stayed behind, attending to other guests. Perhaps my luck, perhaps part of a plan. In the army, they taught me there are no coincidences, only well-disguised traps. We walked down a narrow corridor illuminated by subdued ultraviolet lamps, which made skin appear unnaturally pale and white clothing elements ghostly luminescent. The irony of the moment didn't escape me. For so many years I infiltrated terrorist and drug cartel fortifications, and now I was sneaking after my own wife like a thief, afraid of being discovered. You know, Mr. Reed, most people come to us out of curiosity, Christina spoke quietly, not turning around. But they stay because of addiction. Addiction. I carefully maintained the conversation while continuing to study the space with a professional eye. Surveillance cameras, exit locations, number of guards. To sensations impossible to obtain anywhere except chromatic. She stopped before a massive door with an electronic lock. My paints create connections, not just between bodies but between minds, souls if you will. Christina placed her palm on the scanner and the door silently opened, revealing something that made me freeze. Before me was a genuine underground complex, much larger than could have been assumed. The central space was an enormous hall with a 20-meter ceiling, which contained terraces connected by spiral staircases. On each terrace were separate booths with translucent walls. Inside some, silhouettes of people could be seen. Welcome to the real Chromatic. Christina made a sweeping gesture. A club for those who wish to experience the highest form of art and connection. The Special Forces brain instantly assessed the operation's scale. At least 50 separate rooms, minimum 20 staff in black-purple attire, modern security system, and God, is that the state governor performing a sensual dance for 3 half-naked women on the central platform. I nearly choked. Even in Kandahar, I hadn't encountered such unexpected sights. Impressive, isn't it? Christina smiled, noticing my reaction. The elite of society gathers here. Politicians, businessmen, celebrities, people who determine the fates of millions can here be just people. Just people. A good formulation for those engaging in activities for which ordinary citizens get arrested, I thought, watching a silver-haired man who suspiciously resembled a federal judge allow 2 assistants to paint his body with fluorescent paints. "What's so special about this?" I asked, portraying a sophisticated guest. "Exclusive clubs for the elite have existed for centuries." Christina looked at me with slight surprise, as if I'd asked an incredibly naive question. "It's not about exclusivity, Mr. Reed. It's about an experience impossible anywhere else." She lowered her voice to an intimate whisper. "My paints are special. They create neural connections between people, allowing them to feel what the other feels. When 2 people are painted with paired patterns and touch each other, they literally sense the other's body as their own." I suppressed the urge to laugh nervously. My wife, with whom I had shared a bed for 7 years, it turns out, had all this time been developing paints that create telepathic connections between people. And I, a former Special Forces operator with heightened attention to detail, hadn't noticed a thing. Either she's a genius of conspiracy, or I'm the worst husband in the world. "Sounds like science fiction," I remarked, trying to maintain a skeptical tone. "Neurochemistry, Mr. Reed. Pigments with nanoparticles that interact with nerve endings and create a temporary bridge between the nervous systems of 2 people." Christina said this as if explaining a cheesecake recipe. "But the most interesting part isn't even that. The patterns I create determine the nature and intensity of the connection. Different patterns, different effects." She pointed to a couple in the far corner of the hall. A man and woman, completely naked, with identical spiral patterns covering their entire bodies from neck to ankles. They stood face to face, touching only with fingertips, but their bodies moved in perfect unison, as if performing a dance visible only to them. "Neuronal synchronization," explained Christina. "They're now feeling every nerve of each other. Imagine the sensation of orgasm multiplied by 2. You feel not only your own pleasure but your partner's, which reflects back to you and intensifies again." I watched all this, with only one question spinning in my head. Where on earth did Christina learn to create neuroactive paints? They certainly don't teach that in Art Academy. Perhaps in military research laboratories, which even I with my clearance level didn't have access to. As we progressed through the main hall of Chromatic, the scale of the operation became increasingly evident. This wasn't just a place for exotic entertainment for the elite. It was an entire underground empire. "Each terrace represents a certain level of experience," continued Christina, pointing to the spiral tiers. "The first 3 levels are accessible to all club members. The 4th and 5th, only for those who have undergone special initiation. And the 6th." She smiled mysteriously, and I realized with horror that I had never seen this smile on my wife's face, as if next to me was her perfect doppelganger from a parallel universe. "What's on the 6th?" I asked. "A mystery to be earned." She shifted her gaze to my mask. "And which you may never see, Mr. Reed, unless—" Suddenly Christina fell silent, looking past me. I turned and saw Richard Weiss approaching us, accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit. "Madame Chris, our special guest has arrived," announced Weiss, and from his tone I understood that this special guest held a high position in the club's hierarchy. Christina immediately changed. Her posture became more formal, movements more measured. "Mr. Mayor," she inclined her head in a slight bow, and I nearly lost my balance. The city mayor, Robert Hedges, the man who won the election on a platform of moral revival and fighting corruption. The same one who last week in a television interview declared the need to cleanse our city of depravity and return to family values. "Madame Chris," the mayor spoke quietly but authoritatively, "I am ready for the session. We have much to discuss, in private." "Of course," Christina turned to me. "My apologies, Mr. Reed. Duty calls. Mr. Weiss will take care of you and show you the remaining areas of the club accessible to you." And she departed with the mayor, leaving me alone with Weiss, who was looking at me with an appraising gaze. "You've made an impression on Madame Chris," he noted when they were out of sight. "That's rare. Usually she doesn't spend so much time on newcomers." I tried to hide the mix of shock and fury boiling inside me. My damn wife had just left with the mayor to conduct some special session. And judging by all appearances, this wasn't their first meeting. "I suppose that's a compliment," I replied, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "More than that," Weiss gestured for me to follow him. "Believe me, Madame Chris chooses her clients more carefully than the military selects snipers." The irony of this comparison nearly made me laugh. If only he knew who he was talking to. The next hour Weiss showed me the accessible zones of the club. Luxurious halls with champagne and appetizers, relaxation rooms with soft sofas, even something like an art gallery where photographs of bodies painted by Christina were exhibited. "This is just the outer shell," explained Weiss. "Chromatic is much more than just a place for pleasure. It's a center of influence. Deals are made here, alliances formed, political careers born or die." He spoke about this with the pride of a man who had created something significant. I began to understand that Weiss considered himself not just an administrator, but an ideologue, the architect of this place. "The patterns that Madame Chris creates are not just art. They're a language, a system of symbols," he continued. "Certain patterns mean certain inclinations, opportunities, resources. When you see a person with a specific pattern, you know what to expect from them and what they can offer." We passed a group of men and women quietly conversing in one of the alcoves. Among them, I recognized a well-known banker, 2 city council members, and the head of a pharmaceutical company that had recently won a multi-million-dollar government contract. "That pinkish-purple curl above the left collarbone," whispered Weiss, noticing my glance, "means the bearer is seeking political patronage and is willing to pay with information. And the spiral pattern on that gray gentleman's wrist speaks of his ability to influence regulatory decisions." I listened to this with growing horror. Chromatic turned out to be not just an underground club for elite perverts. It was a genuine shadow exchange of influence, where corruption and blackmail were disguised as art and pleasure. "And what pattern means, 'I'll kill you if I find out you're cheating with my wife'?" I nearly asked, but instead said. "Impressive. And did Madame Chris invent all these symbols?" "She didn't just invent them." Weiss's voice contained undisguised admiration. "She created a system, a language that cannot be forged or copied. Only she knows the complete map of symbols, and only she can create the correct pigment combinations for each pattern." Well, my wife turned out to be not just a body artist or creator of neuroactive paints. She was the architect of an entire underground system for distributing power and influence. I didn't know whether to admire her or be horrified. Perhaps both. When we returned to the central hall, what Weiss announced as a chromatic performance began, a kind of show demonstrating the capabilities of Christina's special paints. 6 naked people appeared in the center of the hall, 3 men and 3 women, their bodies completely painted in a unified color scheme, but with different patterns. They arranged themselves in a circle, touching only with fingertips. "Now you'll see how complete synchronization works," whispered Weiss, "when 6 different consciousnesses merge into one." Quiet, hypnotic music began playing, and the 6 started moving, slowly at first, then faster, never breaking contact. Their movements were so synchronized that it seemed they were controlled by a single mind. It looked simultaneously beautiful and frightening. Then Christina emerged from the darkness without the mayor. She wore a long purple robe which she discarded, remaining in something like a ritual garment, a black bodysuit with glowing threads woven into the fabric, forming a complex pattern. In her hands she held a special brush, glowing with the same cold light. "Color is not just a reflection of light," her voice, amplified by a microphone, spread throughout the hall. "Color is the language in which our feelings speak, our desires, our secret selves. Today I invite you to experience a new shade of this language, Chromatic Fusion Level 3. She approached the circle of dancers and began adding new elements to their designs, quick, precise brush movements leaving glowing traces on their skin. As she supplemented the patterns, the dancers' movements became increasingly synchronized and more intimate. I observed this spectacle with growing discomfort. What Christina was creating transcended art or entertainment. It was something almost mystical, manipulation of human consciousness through neurochemistry. The performance reached its climax when all 6 dancers simultaneously threw back their heads in an ecstatic gesture, and their bodies momentarily glowed so brightly that viewers had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the dancers slowly sank to their knees, like marionettes with cut strings. The hall erupted in applause. Christina bowed, her face radiant with triumph and something else I had never seen on my wife's face: power. Absolute, unwavering confidence in her own might. "Impressive, isn't it?" asked Weiss when the applause subsided. "This is just the demonstration version. Much more. Personalized experiences are available to club members." I nodded, not trusting my voice. My brain was feverishly working, trying to fit everything I'd seen into some coherent picture. My wife wasn't just a body artist, but also a creator of neuroactive substances, a leader of a secret society, and what else didn't I know about her? "How does one become a club member?" I finally asked. Weiss smiled, as if he had been waiting for this question. "It's not simply a matter of money, Mr. Reed. Chromatic isn't an ordinary club where membership can be purchased. Here you need to be useful." "Useful? You must have something that represents value to the community," he explained. "Influence, information, special connections or talents." I pondered. What did I have? Military training, survival skills, extensive knowledge of infiltration tactics and security. And of course, the fact that I was the husband of the club's chief artist, though that's hardly worth mentioning in my membership application. "I'm a photographer," I reminded him, "specializing in confidential shoots." Weiss looked at me with renewed interest. "You mean you document things people would prefer to hide?" "Let's just say," I allowed myself a hint of a smile, "I know how to be invisible and capture moments when people are most vulnerable." This was true, though in a different context. In special forces, I sometimes functioned as a scout documenting enemy positions. Weiss looked intrigued. "Interesting. We might just need a person with such skills. Some of our clients value quality private photo sessions of their chromatic experiences. And others probably value compromising material on political opponents," I thought, but aloud said, "I could provide examples of my work." "Excellent." Weiss took a small card from his inner jacket pocket and handed it to me. "Come to this place tomorrow at 14:00. Bring your portfolio. If it makes the right impression, we'll discuss your membership in Chromatic and possible collaboration." I took the card, which listed an address in a prestigious area of the city. "And Madame Chris, will she be at the meeting?" Perhaps, Weiss answered evasively. It all depends on how promising she considers you. Oh, I'm sure she'll find me damned promising when she learns who I am, I thought, but just nodded with a polite smile. When I left Chromatic that night, one thing was clear. I needed to infiltrate the club and discover the whole truth about my wife's secret life. And the best way to do that was to become a client, go through their entire initiation system, get to know the key figures. After all, if my wife could lead a double life as a skilled deceiver, I could play this game too. And I even had an advantage: years of special training, and the fact that she had no idea her secret was exposed. Stepping outside, I breathed deeply in the night air and smiled grimly. Just a day ago, I was simply a survival instructor with a complicated military past and a happy marriage. Now I was an undercover agent investigating my own wife's activities, an artist, neurochemist, and possibly the head of a secret society manipulating the city's elite. Funny how one overheard conversation can completely turn your life upside down. In Afghanistan, I was taught, the most dangerous threat is the one you don't see. Who would have thought it had been sleeping next to me in our marital bed all this time? Chapter 3: Toxic Art. Have you ever tried to create a fake portfolio of an erotic photographer overnight? No. Well, that's exactly what I was doing until 5 in the morning, armed with a laptop, Photoshop, and a supply of whiskey I kept for particularly difficult days. Believe me, discovering that your wife is the queen of an underground club practicing neurochemical body art definitely qualifies as an especially difficult day. Simply magnificent, Mr. Reed. Richard Weiss leaned back in his chair, having scrolled through the last series of my fake works on his tablet. Especially impressive is your ability to capture the moment of highest tension. We sat in his office, a spacious penthouse with panoramic windows overlooking the city park, a place that screamed money as loudly as C4 explosive announces its presence in an enclosed space. It's a matter of patience, I replied, an understanding of human anatomy, and 6 hours of work in Photoshop and detailed study of Playboy archives. I added mentally. Who would have thought that graphic editing skills acquired while creating survival training manuals would come in handy for forging erotic photographs? You have an interesting style, Weiss gestured, offering me whiskey. I declined. Such attention to detail, almost clinical. No wonder. I had assembled most of the photographs from medical illustrations and stock images. For a guy who could once disassemble and reassemble an assault rifle blindfolded in 30 seconds, digital montage presented no particular difficulty. As you understand, membership in Chromatic requires not only talent but also loyalty. Weiss studied me like an entomologist examining a particularly interesting beetle. There are certain rules that cannot be broken. Confidentiality above all, I nodded. That's just the beginning, he smiled. Club members form an ecosystem, a symbiosis if you will. Everyone gives something and receives something. Disruption of this balance is punished. He said this lightly, almost casually, but I caught the hidden threat. After all, threats were my specialization, both recognizing them and eliminating them. I understand the rules of the game, I calmly replied. Excellent. Weiss opened a desk drawer and took out a small box resembling a cufflink case. Then, allow me to officially invite you to a private Chromatic event this evening, a special occasion for Madame Chris's select clients. He handed me the box. Inside lay a stylized metal key with an embossed symbol resembling the Greek letter chi. This is not just a pass, Weiss explained. It's your identification in the Chromatic system. Carry it with you whenever you come to events. I took the key, feeling its weight. Strange how a small piece of metal can symbolize such big problems. Tonight's event is special, continued Weiss. Madame Chris will present her new series of chromatic works to a very narrow circle of sponsors. And I'm admitted to this circle. I didn't hide my surprise. Let's just say, his eyes glinted, we're looking for a new photographer to document certain aspects of our events. It's a sort of probationary period. Documentation, meaning. Interesting, what exact aspects need photographic recording? Based on what I already knew about Chromatic, it could be anything, from blackmailing high-profile clients to creating some kind of perverted archive. The address, Weiss handed me another card, and time. Be punctual, Mr. Reed. Madame Chris doesn't like to wait. I looked at the card. The address indicated one of the city's most upscale hotels. And don't forget your camera, added Weiss. Tonight you'll be more than just an observer. The Imperial Hotel, a place where one night costs more than the average monthly salary in the city. I arrived an hour before the appointed time to study the situation, an old habit that saved my life more than once or twice. The Chromatic event was taking place in the presidential suite on the top floor. Security was unobtrusive but professional, 2 guards at the main elevator, 2 more at the service elevator, cameras in every corner. However, for a former member of SEAL Team 6, this was more of a light warm-up than a real problem. I took the elevator up, holding my camera and metal pass key. A familiar guard from the club stood at the suite door, who silently nodded seeing the key and opened the door for me. Inside were about 20 people, men in expensive suits, several women in evening gowns, all with champagne glasses, all with the same expression of restrained anticipation on their faces. I recognized a couple of politicians, a well-known developer, the editor-in-chief of the city newspaper. In the center of the living room was a kind of podium, surrounded by a translucent screen. Behind it, the silhouettes of people preparing for something could be discerned. Mr. Reed, Weiss materialized beside me. Glad you're punctual. Allow me to explain your role tonight. He led me aside, to a window overlooking the night city. You will document the process of creating chromatic patterns on our special guest, he explained quietly. This is for our archive. Special guest, I asked. Mr. Macpherson, Weiss nodded toward a silver-haired man standing at the bar. Recently appointed chairman of the City Zoning and Urban Planning Commission. The approval of certain significant projects of our members depends on him. I looked carefully at Macpherson, a typical bureaucrat with pretensions to aristocracy. Well-groomed, but with that special arrogance that comes with newly acquired power. Today he'll receive his first chromatic pattern, continued Weiss. It's an initiation into our inner circle. At that moment the light in the room dimmed, and Christina emerged from behind the screen. She wore a black form-fitting dress with a high slit, her hair gathered in an elegant bun. In her hands, a stylized silver case resembling a jewelry box. Good evening, dear friends. Her voice sounded soft yet authoritative. Tonight we have a special event, welcoming a new member to our family. She paused, scanning the room. For a fraction of a second, her eyes lingered on me, and I held my breath. But there was no recognition in her gaze, only professional assessment. Mr. Macpherson, she extended her hand, are you ready to feel a true connection? The bureaucrat was visibly nervous, but nodded and approached the podium. Christina gestured for him to remove his jacket and shirt. Today I will create for you the Chronos pattern, she announced, opening the case and extracting a set of tools. It symbolizes power over time and space, especially urban space. A quiet chuckle ran through the room. No one doubted what this was about. Macpherson's power over city territories and his ability to accelerate or slow down project approval processes. I raised the camera and began shooting. Christina applied a complex spiral pattern to Macpherson's chest and shoulders using purple-gold paints that seemed to glow from within in the subdued lighting. Her movements were precise, confident, the hands of an artist accustomed to the finest work. Each element of the pattern has meaning, she explained, continuing her work. The spiral signifies decision-making cycles, the amber points, key projects requiring special attention. The guests listened attentively, occasionally exchanging knowing smiles. This wasn't just body art, it was a public declaration of corrupt arrangements, encoded in an aesthetically flawless form. After 40 minutes, the work was completed. Macpherson's chest and shoulders were covered with a complex, hypnotically beautiful pattern that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. And now, Christina turned to the guests, the final touch, activation of the pattern. She took a small vial of clear liquid from the case and a special brush with a metal tip. This is the catalyst, she explained. It activates the pigments and creates a neural connection between the pattern bearer and the curator. She applied the liquid in a thin line bordering the entire pattern. At the moment of completing the circle, something strange happened. The pattern flashed brighter, and Macpherson sharply inhaled, his eyes widening in surprise or shock. "Feel it?" Christina asked quietly. "Yes," he exhaled. "It's incredible." I continued photographing, trying to hold the camera steady, though inside everything was boiling with questions. What exactly had they done to this man? What kind of neural connection? And most importantly, how voluntary was his consent? The ceremony concluded with general applause. Macpherson, with the pattern now dry on his chest, put on his shirt, leaving the top buttons undone to show the edge of the design, a sort of badge of belonging to an elite club. The guests dispersed around the room, resuming small talk. Christina and Weiss were quietly talking in the corner, periodically glancing at me. I pretended to check the captured material, surreptitiously observing them. Suddenly Macpherson, standing at the bar with a glass of whiskey, staggered and clutched his chest. At first, no one paid attention, so what if a man had too much to drink? But then he made a strange rasping sound and collapsed to the floor. I instinctively rushed to him ahead of the other guests. Professional reflex. In special forces, I underwent advanced medical training. Macpherson lay on the floor, his body arching in convulsions, eyes rolled back, foam coming from his mouth. Classic signs of neurotoxin poisoning. "Call an ambulance," I shouted, checking his pulse. "Weak, irregular." "No doctors," Weiss said sharply, appearing beside me. "We have our own medical protocol." He made a sign, and two men in dark suits lifted Macpherson and carried him behind the screen. The guests silently watched, their faces impenetrable, as if a man falling in convulsions was part of a planned performance. I got up from my knees, feeling a chill creep up my spine. Something here was categorically wrong. My intuition screamed of danger, that same feeling that in the mountains of Afghanistan made me push my comrades to the ground a second before an explosion. "What's wrong with him?" I asked Weiss when he returned. "A minor allergic reaction," he shrugged. "Happens with newcomers, nothing serious." Liar. I had seen enough poisonings in my life to distinguish anaphylactic shock from neurotoxin effects. What happened to Macpherson was not an allergy. "Continue photographing the guests, Mr. Reed," Weiss patted my shoulder. "We need a good portfolio for this evening." I nodded and raised the camera, pretending to comply. But now I knew for certain. Chromatic wasn't just an elite corruption club. Something much more sinister was happening here. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Christina disappearing through a door at the far end of the suite. She moved quickly, purposefully. Not a social lady who had finished a performance, but an operative completing a mission. The party continued as if nothing had happened. Guests drank champagne, discussed deals, flirted. No one mentioned Macpherson. It was as if he ceased to exist at the moment of his fall. I took photographs, moving around the room, inconspicuously approaching the door through which Christina had disappeared. A few shots here, a few there, a polite smile, a professional request to turn toward the light. No one suspected that my real interest lay elsewhere. Seizing a moment when Weiss was engaged in conversation with an important guest, I slipped to the door and quietly opened it. Behind it was a short corridor leading to the sleeping area of the presidential suite. I moved silently, a skill honed by years of operations. From under a door at the end of the corridor, a strip of light was visible. Muffled voices came from there. Drawing closer, I made out Christina's voice. Too rapid reaction. The pigment was unstable. "Is that a problem?" replied a male voice I didn't recognize. "No, the effect is the same, just unesthetic. I prefer a more elegant finale." I froze, trying to process what I heard. They were discussing Macpherson's reaction to the paint, not as an accident but as an expected result. "When will the full effect take place?" asked the unknown man. "In 24-36 hours. Symptoms will gradually increase. Those around will decide it's a heart attack or stroke. By then, all pigments will have completely decomposed, leaving no traces." I felt everything turning cold inside. My wife was talking about murder, slow, calculated, inexorable. And judging by her tone, this wasn't the first. "Excellent," said the man. "Let me know when he transitions to the collection. I want to add his works as soon as possible." "Of course," replied Christina. "His last painting is already with us. Now we only need the artist himself, in completed form." Artist, I frantically tried to connect the facts. Macpherson wasn't just an official. He must have been a collector or artist whose works were of interest to whom? To this unknown man, to Chromatic. I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly retreated into a niche with a decorative vase. The door opened, and a tall man with silver hair slicked back emerged from the room. His face seemed vaguely familiar, as if I'd seen his photographs in newspapers or on television. He passed by without noticing me and disappeared around the corridor bend. I waited until his footsteps faded and cautiously approached the partially open door. The room turned out to be a luxurious bedroom converted into a working office. In the middle stood a large table with papers spread out on it. On the walls hung framed photographs. Christina sat at the table with her back to me, writing something on a laptop. I could have entered and confronted her right then. Could have demanded explanations, could have. But the scout's instinct suggested information gathering first, actions later. I backed away from the door and moved further down the corridor. In a presidential suite, there should be another room, possibly connected to this office bedroom. Indeed, at the end of the corridor I discovered another door. Locked. But locks had never been a serious problem for a special forces operator. From my jacket's inner pocket, I took out a set of lock picks disguised as an ordinary key ring. 10 seconds of work, and the door yielded. I slipped inside and quietly closed the door behind me, then froze, letting my eyes adjust to the semi-darkness. This was another bedroom, connected to the office where Christina sat by an interior door. But something was wrong. The air carried a barely perceptible chemical smell, familiar to me from military operations, the smell of a laboratory producing illegal substances. I turned on my phone's flashlight, covering it with my palm so the light wouldn't be visible from under the door. What I saw made me hold my breath. The bedroom had been converted into a chemical laboratory. Along the walls stood shelves with reagents. On the table was complex equipment for mixing and distillation. In the corner, an industrial refrigerator. Above the work table hung a board with chemical formulas and notes. I moved closer, examining the notes. Most were encoded or used professional chemical nomenclature I didn't understand, but some headings were perfectly clear. Neurotoxin A7, action time. Modifications for rapid absorption through skin. Symptomatology mimicking natural causes. My wife was developing poisons. High-class, untraceable poisons that she incorporated into her body art paints, and then used them on chromatic clients. The refrigerator caught my attention. Carefully opening the door, I discovered rows of labeled vials and test tubes inside, each with a label bearing a name and date. The last vial was marked Macpherson, 28.07. Today's date. They had already prepared a special composition for him in advance. I quietly closed the refrigerator and continued my inspection. In the far corner of the room stood a large cabinet with a lock. Another 10 seconds of work with the picks, and I opened it. Inside was a neatly organized archive, folders with names, dates, and photographs. I took the first one at random and opened it. Looking at me was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, alive, healthy, smiling at the camera. And beside it, the same person on his deathbed, with characteristic bluish skin and a frozen expression of agony on his face. Between these photographs was another, his naked body with an artistic pattern applied in the same technique I had seen today on Macpherson. I quickly browsed through several more folders. The same pattern, living person, person with body art, dead person, and dates indicating that between the second and third photographs usually passed from 1 to 3 days. This wasn't just an archive, it was a collection of victims. Each folder also contained newspaper clippings about the person's death, always natural causes or sudden heart attack, and some notes about artwork associated with them. Suddenly, I understood the scheme. All these people were art collectors or artists, and all of them died after a session of body art with my wife. In the far corner of the cabinet, I noticed a special section labeled Upcoming Projects. My heart skipped when I saw a folder marked Hedges, 30.07. The mayor, Robert Hedges, was to be the next victim in 2 days. I heard footsteps in the adjacent room and quickly closed the cabinet, sliding behind the curtain by the window. The door connecting the bedroom laboratory with the office opened, and Christina entered. She moved confidently, habitually, approached the refrigerator, took out some vial, then opened a safe hidden behind a painting, classic genre, seriously, and placed the vial inside. Turning to the table, she quickly wrote something in a notebook, then took her phone and dialed a number. "Yes, the effect has begun," she said quietly. "In 36 hours everything will be complete. Natural causes, no traces. Yes, I've already prepared the composition for Hedges. The gala evening is perfect. Of course, the collection will be enriched with both works." She was silent, listening to the speaker. "No, I have the antidote. As always, you know the rules. Yes, after completion. No alternatives." Antidote, this was new information. And who was this interlocutor demanding the antidote? The collector from Weiss's story? Or was this part of some more complex scheme? Christina finished the conversation and headed for the exit. I held my breath, praying the curtains reliably concealed my silhouette. She paused at the door as if sensing something, but then shook her head and left, closing the door firmly behind her. I waited a minute and emerged from hiding. I needed to document evidence. I took out my camera and methodically began photographing the laboratory, notes, contents of the victim dossier cabinet. I paid special attention to the folder dedicated to the mayor. It contained detailed plans for the gala evening that was to take place in 2 days, and a scheme for accessing the subject's body. When I was about to leave, my gaze fell on the small safe where Christina had placed the vial. The antidote might be there, but there was no time to crack the safe, too risky to linger longer. I silently slipped out of the room and returned to the party the same way I had come. No one seemed to have noticed my absence. Weiss was chatting with a group of guests. Christina was helping one of the women touch up her makeup, perfect cover for applying something deadly. Now I knew the truth, or at least part of it. My wife wasn't just a body artist for the elite. She was a sophisticated killer using her art as a weapon. But why? Who was behind this? And what did this collection she spoke of on the phone mean? I continued photographing guests, smiling, playing the role. But inside me, A plan was forming. I needed to find out more about the collector, find the antidote, and prevent the mayor's murder. And most importantly, understand what happened to the woman I married and when she turned into a cold-blooded poisoner. In the Hindu Kush Mountains, I once tracked a Taliban field commander for a week, I thought, taking another photo of laughing guests. But hunting my own wife definitely wasn't in my career plans. Chapter 4: Poisonous Patterns. You know what's the most difficult thing about discovering your wife is a serial killer? Not the fact itself that she dispatches people to the afterlife using toxic watercolors, and not even that she does it with the artistry of Picasso and the cold-bloodedness of a crocodile. No, the hardest part is continuing to smile at her over breakfast, asking if she wants more coffee, when what you really want to ask is, "How many have you poisoned already, dear?" The alarm went off at 5:30. Without opening my eyes, I turned it off 0.3 seconds before the first signal. 14 years in the Marines taught me to feel time as acutely as a snake feels the heat of its prey. Christina was asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, her dark hair with purple streaks spread across the pillow like an ink stain. I didn't wake her. She had returned late yesterday, another private commission of the kind that had been paying our bills for 3 years now. "Wonderful shots, Mr. Reed." Weiss reviewed the photographs I had handed him the morning after the hotel event. "Madame Chris was very pleased with your discretion." We sat in a cafe not far from the Chromatic office. I deliberately chose an outdoor table, less chance of being overheard, more paths for quick retreat. Old Scout habits die hard. "Glad to hear it." I sipped coffee from my cup. "When is the next event?" "In 2 days." Weiss folded the folder with the photographs. "A gala evening in honor of the mayor, a significant event, in many ways." Indeed, I thought, especially for the mayor himself, who doesn't know it will be his last evening in this world. "I'd like to prepare in advance," I said in a casual tone. "Study the location, plan angles. Perhaps Madame Chris could show me her studio for a photo session about the process of creating art." Weiss looked at me thoughtfully. "A reasonable suggestion. She's actually working on a special pattern for the ceremony right now. I'll call her." He stepped away to make the call, while I mentally prepared for meeting my wife in her professional environment. Ironic, we lived together for 7 years, and I had never seen her real studio. Only the official version she showed everyone, a bright space with easels and harmless water-based paints. I wondered what the place where she actually created her deadly masterpieces looked like. "Madame Chris has agreed." Weiss returned to the table. "She's expecting you in an hour at her studio." He wrote an address on a napkin. An address I had never seen before. Another mystery in the life of the woman I thought was my better half. Christina's studio was located in an old industrial building converted to artists' lofts. Brick wall, large windows tinted with special film. A typical place for a creative person, if you didn't know what exactly she created there. I was greeted by Christina herself, today with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a lab coat over a black fitted dress. The perfect hybrid of scientist and artist. "Mr. Reed," she smiled that professional smile I had never seen at home. "I'm glad you're interested in my creative process." "You create something extraordinary," I replied, entering the spacious studio. "I must capture it, for history." "History?" she laughed softly, closing the door behind me. "Yes, I definitely create history, or rather collect its final moments." The studio was impressive, 2 floors connected by a spiral staircase. The first level was designed as an exhibition space with photographs of Christina's works, samples of pigments in glass display cases, mannequins with patterns drawn on them. The perfect place for receiving clients. But I was interested in the second floor. And judging by how Christina delicately steered me away from the stairs, that's where the real creativity took place. "Tell me how you create your unique pigments." I began unpacking my photography equipment, inconspicuously studying the space. They produce such an unusual effect. The secret is in combining traditional mineral pigments with certain organic components. She approached a long table where containers of powders in different colors were laid out. Each shade requires a special approach, a special mood. She spoke about her poisons as if they were children, with love, with pride. If not for the context, I would have admired her passion for her craft. "May I see your notes, sketches?" I asked, taking several shots of the table with pigments, for a complete picture. Christina momentarily froze, her eyes slightly narrowing, as she did when contemplating a difficult decision. "Why not?" she finally said. "I'll show you my archive, but first, would you like something to drink?" "Ah, sure, a drink from a serial poisoner. Great idea." "Just water if possible," I smiled. "I want to maintain clarity of perception for my work." She nodded and approached a small refrigerator in the corner. I used the moment to discreetly examine the locks on the door leading upstairs. Complex system, but not insurmountable for someone trained to break into terrorist bunkers. "Here's my special album." Christina placed a heavy leather-bound folder on the table. "This is where I keep my most significant works." I opened the album and felt everything freeze inside. On each spread, two photos, a person with Christina's body art and the same person. Dead, but not just dead. Each body was arranged as a work of art, with carefully calculated pose, lighting, details. "Impressive, isn't it?" Christina whispered almost in my ear. "The life-death diptych, my authentic collection." I turned the pages, trying to maintain a look of professional interest. 24 spreads, 24 murders, each captured with aesthetic perfection worthy of a museum. "Why these particular people?" I asked, photographing one of the pages. "Each had their own debt." Christina perched on the edge of the table. "Some stole others' art, some destroyed others' careers, some exploited talents and didn't pay their bills." She spoke of murders as restoring justice. In her eyes was absolute conviction in her righteousness. This was not my Christina, or perhaps she was the real one, and the woman I lived with was merely a mask. On the album's last spread, I saw a photograph of Mayor Hedges next to an empty space, awaiting his posthumous portrait. "Your next project," I pointed to the page. "Hedges?" Christina's lip curled in contempt. "A man who publicly fights for morality while secretly controlling a human trafficking network. His pigments are already prepared. At the gala evening, I'll create my best pattern." While Christina was distracted by a phone call, I discreetly took pictures of the entire album. When she returned, there was slight anxiety on her face. "We'll have to cut our meeting short, Mr. Reed," she said, putting away the album. "Urgent matters have arisen." "Of course," I began gathering my equipment, "but I'd still like to see your technique for applying patterns before the gala evening." Christina tilted her head, studying me with unexpected intensity. "You're too curious for a simple photographer, Mr. Reed, almost like professional observer." My heart skipped a beat. Had she suspected something? "Photography is professional observation," I shrugged, "seeing what others miss." "Indeed," she nodded slowly. "You know, you remind me of someone, something in your bearing." She came closer, studying my face. Even through the mask, her gaze was penetrating. I felt cold sweat running down my back. "Military posture," she continued. "You served." 2 years in the National Guard," I lied casually. "Nothing heroic." "Interesting." She stepped back, but doubt remained in her eyes. "See you at the gala evening, Mr. Reed. Don't be late. The ceremony begins at 9 sharp." Leaving the studio, I didn't go home. Too risky. If Christina suspected something, she might check. Instead, I went to a small motel on the outskirts of town, where I rented a room under a different name. Spreading the photographs on the bed, I began systematizing information. Christina's album was a gold mine: names, dates, motives for murders. But most importantly, There were photographs and notes about the mysterious collector. From the records, it appeared the collector was an elderly man obsessed with rare artworks, especially those connected to their creators' tragic fates. He paid Christina to eliminate competitors at auctions, and she received a percentage of the value of works that significantly increased after their owners' deaths. But there was another side. Christina wrote about her debt to the collector, the need for a regular report and constant antidote. This sounded as if he had some power over her. I enlarged a photograph of one page with Christina's notes. Antidote 7, effectiveness decreasing. Symptoms returning faster. Need new formula. K won't be pleased. So the collector controlled her using poison. The antidote she regularly received was payment for completed orders. My wife was herself a victim. This changed everything. Christina wasn't just a cold-blooded killer. She was a pawn in someone's game, a poisoned weapon in another's hands. The plan came together quickly. I had to act at the gala evening, the last event before the mayor's murder. I needed to save Hedges, find the antidote for Christina, and get to the collector. But first I needed weapons. Not that I could come to a social event with a combat arsenal. I needed something compact, inconspicuous, but effective. At a hardware store, I bought rubber gloves, surgical masks, syringes, and a set of chemicals for a simple sedative compound. Thanks to the field medicine course in Special Forces, I could prepare a substance that would knock someone out in seconds without causing serious harm. Then I rented a van and supplies of technical equipment for an improvised laboratory and possibly a temporary prison. If the collector had indeed poisoned Christina, I needed a place where I could safely keep her while looking for a permanent solution. All this time I continued playing the role of John Reed, photographer, maintaining contact with Weiss and Chromatic. Christina hadn't returned home. According to the housekeeper, she had gone to prepare for an important event. The evening before the gala, I called Mike Turner, my former teammate. I need information about a slow-acting poison that dissolves in the body without a trace, I said without preamble. Jay, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? His voice sounded concerned. Believe me, you don't want to know, I sighed. Just tell me, is there a universal antidote for this type of poisoning? Mike was silent, then said, there's one compound developed for special operations. An atropine combination with modifiers neutralizes most known neurotoxins, but it's practically impossible to obtain. If you had it, I carefully chose my words, what would it look like? Clear liquid in a glass vial with a red stripe, administered intravenously, acts instantly. Jay, don't tell me your wife. Thanks, Mike, I'll call later. I hung up and continued my preparations. Red stripe on the vial. Now I knew what to look for in Christina's safe. Tomorrow evening would decide everything. I would save the mayor, even if he didn't deserve it. Save my wife from the secret puppeteer who turned her into a killer. And then I'd deal with the collector who transformed the woman I love into a living weapon. Who would have thought that Navy SEAL skills would come in handy for saving my own marriage? Although, given the circumstances, I doubt our family therapist would have suggested a special operation as a method of marital therapy. Chapter 5, Shades of Betrayal. The city hall shone with lights, transformed into something resembling a royal palace. Black limousines dropped off guests at the main entrance, security scanned invitations, waiters with trays of champagne glided between guests. The perfect event for society columns, the perfect place for a murder disguised as art. I entered through the service entrance, showing my photographer pass. Camera around my neck and the press card issued by Weiss, perfect cover. Security didn't even glance under my jacket, where in a special pocket lay a syringe with prepared sedative and a plastic container for the antidote vial I planned to acquire. In the main hall of City Hall, I took up position near a column providing a view of the entire area. Guests continued arriving, a pulsating mass of tuxedos and evening gowns, fake smiles and whispers behind backs. The city's elite had gathered to honor the mayor, not suspecting they were attending his wake. I spotted him immediately, a silver-haired man with impeccable posture, surrounded by a retinue of assistants. The same man I had seen leaving Christina's room at the hotel, the collector. His photograph was in Christina's album, simply labeled K. He stood at an improvised gallery set up at the far end of the hall, an exhibition of rare paintings from the city's private collections. The charity auction benefiting city restoration programs was the highlight of the evening. "Interested in art, Mr. Reed?" A voice behind me made me start. I turned, Weiss, immaculate in a tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne. "Only as a photographer," I replied, raising my camera. "Who is that man by the paintings?" "Ah, our main benefactor of the evening," Weiss lowered his voice. "Herr Klein, Europe's largest collector of post-war art, and a special partner of Madame Chris." Partner? An interesting definition for a man who, I believed, kept my wife on a hook with poison. I looked more closely at Klein. Age around 70. Perfect posture, confident economical movements. Eyes cold, assessing. He reminded me of field commanders I had encountered during operations, the same look of a man for whom others' lives are expendable currency. "Where is Madame Chris?" I asked, scanning the crowd. "I need to clarify details for the photo session." "She's preparing," Weiss pointed to a small door behind the stage. "The ceremony begins in 30 minutes. The mayor will receive his special gift." I nodded and headed toward the stage, ostensibly checking the lighting for future shots. In reality, I needed to get closer to Klein, hear him, understand exactly what I was dealing with. The collector stood before an impressionist painting, whose name I didn't recognize, quietly conversing with the exhibition curator. "Duren's last work," he was saying with a slight German accent, "created a week before his tragic death. Notice the intensity of the blue, its almost physically palpable agony." "Surprising that you agreed to exhibit it, Herr Klein," noted the curator. "As far as I know, you rarely share specimens from your last masterpieces collection." "Special case," Klein's eyes gleamed. "Tonight is historic. Soon my collection will be enriched with another valuable acquisition." "I appreciate true art connoisseurs," Klein's voice was now addressed to me. "But usually photographers focus on people, not paintings." I lowered my camera, meeting his gaze. "Sometimes paintings tell more about people than they do themselves," I replied, "especially the final works of great masters." A thin smile crossed his lips. "You understand the essence, Mr. Reed, John Reed." I extended my hand. "Photographer for Chromatic." "Ah, you work with Madame Chris." His handshake was firm, but his palm cold. "A great honor. She chooses her employees as carefully as I select exhibits for my collection." The curator moved away, leaving us alone before the painting. "And how is the mayor connected to your collection?" I risked. Klein's face momentarily hardened, then he laughed, a dry, unpleasant laugh. "You truly are an unusual photographer, Mr. Reed. The mayor, he's just a patron of the arts, and today his contribution to my collection will be invaluable." From his words, I understood that Hedges wasn't just another victim. He was directly connected to Klein's collection. Perhaps he owned something the collector wanted to acquire, and Christina was to ensure this property transfer in the most radical way. I needed to act quickly. The ceremony was 20 minutes away, and I had to reach Christina before she came on stage with poisonous paints for the mayor. But Weiss seemed to be keeping me under observation. Each time I approached the door behind the stage, he appeared nearby with new instructions for photography. "Need to check the equipment," I told him after the third such accidental meeting. I'm having problems with my main camera. The spare is in the service area. I'll accompany you, Weiss immediately offered. No need. I took out my wallet and as if accidentally dropped it, spilling its contents. Damn. While Weiss bent to help collect the change, I discreetly pulled out the syringe. When he straightened up, my hand accidentally brushed his neck. The injection was practically imperceptible. The thin needle penetrated the skin and injected the sedative directly into the carotid artery. Sorry for my clumsiness, I said, watching his pupils dilate. No problem, Weiss swayed. I need to sit down. I caught him, as if helping him reach the nearest chair, and seated him in a secluded corner. To onlookers, it appeared that the man simply felt unwell. Within 5 minutes, he would sleep for at least several hours, enough time for me to complete my mission. Now the path to the door behind the stage was clear. I slipped through it, finding myself in a narrow service corridor. At the end was another door with a sign reading "Artistic." Muffled sounds came from there. I moved silently down the corridor, keeping my hand under my jacket. The artistic room door was ajar, and through the gap I saw Christina. She stood at a table on which her tools were laid out: brushes, special applicators, vials of paint. The mayor's tailcoat hung on a special stand, evidently for the ceremonial changing and application of the honorary pattern. I counted 3 breaths and entered, quietly closing the door behind me. Christina turned, her hand instinctively reaching for a paint-mixing knife. "Mr. Reed," she relaxed, recognizing me. "You startled me. The ceremony hasn't started yet." "I needed to talk to you privately," I slowly approached. "About your collector, and about the poison." Her face didn't flinch, but I noticed how the knuckles whitened on her fingers gripping the knife. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she said evenly. "And where is Weiss?" "Weiss is resting." I took another step. "I know about your album with diptychs, about the 24 murders, about how Klein controls you through poison and antidote." Now I stood just a meter from her. Her eyes I had examined across the breakfast table for 7 years, seemed completely foreign, cold, calculating. "And what do you intend to do with this information, Mr. Photographer?" she asked, placing special emphasis on the last word. "Save you." I raised my hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I know you're not acting of your own volition, that Klein is blackmailing you, forcing you to kill for his collection." A strange expression appeared on Christina's face, a mixture of surprise and amusement. "Save me?" she smirked. "How noble, and how do you plan to do that?" "I've found the formula for a universal antidote. We can neutralize whatever he's poisoned you with, and then—" I didn't finish the sentence. Christina burst out laughing, loudly, without restraint. Not with that melodious laugh I knew, but a sharp, almost hysterical sound. "Mr. Reed," she said, recovering from laughter, "or what is your real name?" I froze. She knew. Somehow she knew I wasn't who I claimed to be. "Jason," I said quietly, dropping the mask, both metaphorically and literally, removing the half-mask covering the upper part of my face. "Jason Murphy, your husband." Christina didn't look shocked. Rather, slightly annoyed, as if she had discovered a minor inconvenience in her plans. "I began to suspect in the studio," she said calmly. "There was something familiar in your movements, military bearing, the characteristic tilt of your head when you're focused, details I studied over 7 years." She set aside the knife and leaned against the table, crossing her arms over her chest. "And all this time you've been following me, playing detective." Her voice contained a strange mixture of admiration and contempt. "I must admit I underestimated you, Jason. Never thought you capable of such initiative." "I didn't come to accuse you," I said firmly, "but to help, to free you from Klein's influence. I know he poisoned you, that you're forced to fulfill his orders to receive the antidote." Christina studied me with scientific interest, like a rare specimen of insect. "What a touching theory," she finally said. Victim wife, rescuer husband. Classic plot. Too bad it has nothing to do with reality. She moved away from the table and opened a small safe hidden behind a mirror. Inside, I saw a row of vials, those same ones with a red stripe that should have contained the antidote. See these vials, Jason? She took one, rolling it between her fingers. This isn't an antidote, it's, let's say, a stimulant for Klaus. A special compound I developed specifically for him. It induces euphoria, heightens art perception, and makes him exceptionally receptive to my suggestions. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You control him, not the other way around. Christina smiled. That same smile I had seen 1,000 times over breakfast when she asked me to pass the jam. Klaus Klein is a brilliant collector, but 15 years ago he began losing his edge. I restored his sharpness of sensation, helped assemble a unique collection. At first it was just light chemical support for an old man, but then, she shrugged, he became addicted to my compounds, to my ideas, to my art. In my head, the puzzle was reassembling. Klein wasn't the puppeteer, Christina was, and the victim I came to save wasn't the one I thought. But why? I tried to process what I'd heard. Why kill all these people? Christina returned the vial to the safe and locked it. These aren't just murders, Jason. This is justice. Her face changed, becoming harder. In her eyes appeared that dangerous gleam I had seen in people absolutely convinced of their righteousness. Every person in my album deserved their fate. Do you know how it all started? With my professor at the Art Academy. He was a star of the art world, a great talent, and a rapist who abused female students. Her voice faltered for the first time during our conversation, he ruined my best friend's life. When she tried to press charges, she was thrown out of the academy. A month later, she committed suicide. I remembered that Christina never talked about her years of study, always changed the subject. I created a special compound for him, she continued. A mixture of paints he loved to use, poison absorbed through the skin, a painful, slow death, just enough to finish his last masterpiece. She spoke about this with such detached, businesslike manner, as if describing a chemical experiment, not a murder. After that, I met Klein. He was looking for my professor's works for his collection. When he saw the last canvas, created under the influence of my poison, he was fascinated, said he had never seen such pure agony embodied in color, and offered me a collaboration. Christina moved to the table and picked up a thin brush, absently stroking it. Since then we've worked together. I find people who deserve justice, corrupt officials, rapists, human traffickers, those who hide behind respectable facades, and society gets rid of monsters. She looked directly at me, and I saw absolute conviction in her eyes. Mayor Hedges isn't just corrupt, Jason. He organized an entire network trafficking women for elite brothels, dozens of lives ruined. Law enforcement is powerless. He has too many connections, but he's a passionate collector of Ming Dynasty Chinese paintings, and tonight, he'll complete his collection. I tried to digest what I'd heard. My wife wasn't a victim, but the executor of her own perverted justice, a serial killer with a moral code. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. All these years, we were family. In her eyes flashed a shadow, almost of regret. You were my anchor, Jason, my connection to normal life. With you I could be just Christina, just a wife, not a judge, not an executioner. She paused. And I knew who you were, a former Navy SEAL with an acute sense of justice, with your black and white morality. You wouldn't have understood. Are you so sure about that? I took a step toward her. She tensed, ready for attack. I raised my hands, showing empty palms. In Afghanistan, I saw what happens when justice doesn't work, saw villages ravaged by the Taliban, children sold into slavery, women stoned to death for imagined crimes. I spoke quietly but firmly. Sometimes the official system is inadequate. Sometimes people are needed who operate outside it. Christina looked at me with distrust. What are you proposing, Jason? Partnership, I answered simply. Your intellect and my skills, your chemistry and my tactics, together we could make your mission more effective, safer. I saw emotions replacing each other in her eyes: distrust, surprise, hope. Are you serious? You're not going to turn me into the police, read me a lecture about the sanctity of human life. 7 years of special operations taught me that sometimes you have to choose the lesser of evils. I took another step toward her. I just want to know one thing. Do you thoroughly verify your victims? Are you absolutely certain of their guilt? Christina nodded with professional seriousness. I have a system, evidence, no questionable cases, only those whose guilt is indisputable but who have escaped official punishment. I extended my hand to her. Then I'm with you to the end, but with one condition: from now on we work together. No secrets, no separate lives, we're a team. Christina looked at my outstretched hand. For several seconds she hesitated, then decisively grasped it with hers. Team, she agreed, and I saw in her eyes something I hadn't seen for a long time: genuine, unpretended sincerity. But what about tonight? The mayor must receive his punishment. I smiled, not cheerfully but resolutely. Show me the evidence of his crimes, and if it's convincing, we'll conduct the operation together, my first mission in our new team. Christina smiled back, and in this smile was something predatory, something dangerous. But for the first time in a long time, it was a real smile, without a mask, without pretense. I have a whole dossier. She opened her laptop. Documents, witness testimonies, photographs, everything needed for sentencing. Then show me. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her. And tell me your plan, then we'll improve it. Thus began our new partnership, an alliance of a former Navy SEAL and artist poisoner. Our own war for justice, which we decided to wage together, outside the law, but according to our own code of honor. The city mayor didn't know that in an hour, when a beautiful woman would be applying an intricate pattern to his chest as recognition of his service to art, her husband would be standing beside her, playing the role of photographer, and that this snapshot would be the last in his life, and the first in their new joint collection. Chapter 6: The Final Masterpiece. Fate has a strange sense of humor. For 14 years I carried out operations to eliminate enemies of the state. Another 7 lived a peaceful family life. And now I stood beside my poisoner wife, photographing as she applied deadly body art to the city mayor's chest, the applauding crowd having no idea they were witnessing a delayed execution. Life truly is unpredictable. Smile, Mr. Mayor. I aimed the lens at Hedges, whose well-fed face glistened with pride. This is a historic moment. He smiled, not suspecting how prophetic my words were. Historic moment, indeed. The final hours in the life of Robert Hedges, city mayor and organizer of a human trafficking network. Christina worked with the grace of a true artist. Her fingers moved quickly and precisely across his chest, applying a complex pattern in purple and gold pigments mixed with a special compound that would begin to act in 6 hours, enough time for the mayor to return home and go to bed. By morning, everything would look like a heart attack, no traces of poison in the body. After viewing the evidence Christina had collected, I had no doubts. Files with data on missing women, hidden conversation recordings, testimonies given under fear of death. Hedges was a monster in human guise, hiding behind a mask of respectability. The final touch, whispered Christina, applying the finishing strokes, the catalyst. She ran a special brush along the contour of the entire drawing, activating compounds that would make the process irreversible. The mayor flinched, feeling a slight burning. It reacts a bit with the skin, Christina smiled. Don't worry, that's normal. Hedges nodded, enchanted not so much by the pattern as by the proximity of a beautiful woman. His hands repeatedly tried to accidentally touch her, which only strengthened my resolve. The ceremony concluded with applause. The mayor, with his painted chest, proudly buttoned his shirt, leaving the top buttons open to show the edge of the pattern, proof of his belonging to a special circle. "Magnificent work, Madame Chris," Klein approached us, his eyes gleaming with unhealthy excitement. "Truly your best pattern." "Thank you," Christina inclined her head slightly. "I hope it will be a worthy addition to your collection." Klein nodded, then turned his gaze to me. "And you, Mr. Reed, have successfully captured the process." "From first to last stroke," I confirmed, displaying the camera. "Complete documentation for your archive." "Excellent," Klein lowered his voice. "Expecting you both in 2 hours at my gallery. We need to discuss logistics of acquisition." By logistics, he meant the plan for transporting the mayor's collection of Chinese paintings after his death. According to documents Christina showed me, Hedges had left a will stipulating that all his artworks would pass to Klein's foundation in the event of his death. "We'll be there," promised Christina. "I have a special present for you." When Klein walked away, she quietly said, "Change of plan. Today we'll complete 2 matters simultaneously." I raised an eyebrow inquiringly, and she continued, barely moving her lips. "Klein is becoming unmanageable, requesting increasingly complex orders. His latest idea, eliminate the governor next month. Too risky, too noticeable." "And what's the plan?" I asked, pretending to check camera settings. "At the gallery, I'll show you there." Christina squeezed my wrist. "Are you really with me, despite everything?" I looked into the eyes of the woman who, I thought, I had known for 7 years, but in reality was only beginning to know. "To the end," I replied, and this was true, though not in the sense she understood. Klein's private gallery was located in an old mansion on the city outskirts, a 3-story Victorian-era building, surrounded by a manicured garden and high fence. We passed through the main gate, showing the guards special passes. "Welcome to Last Masterpieces," Christina said quietly as we climbed marble steps, "the most sinister collection in the art world." Inside, we were met by Klein himself. He was alone, without his usual retinue of assistants. Apparently, today's meeting was especially confidential. "Madame Chris, Mr. Reed," he made an inviting gesture. "Allow me to show you the holy of holies of my collection, especially you, Mr. Reed, as the new partner in our enterprise." We walked through a suite of rooms, each furnished as a museum hall with perfect lighting, climate control, and security system. Paintings hung on the walls, dissimilar in style and technique, but united by some eerie energy. Even without knowing their history, one could feel these were works of people on the edge of life and death. "Every canvas here is an artist's last breath," Klein proudly explained. "The final flash of genius before extinction. See this abstraction. The artist created it the day before death from a sudden heart attack. And this landscape. Its author accidentally overdosed on medication a week after completing the work." I photographed the paintings, noting security system details. Motion sensors, cameras, camouflaged panels with alarm buttons. This man seriously protected his collection of death. Finally, we ascended to the 3rd floor, to the sanctuary, as Klein called it, a spacious room under a glass dome, bathed in moonlight. Here the most valuable exhibits were kept. "And this," Klein pointed to an empty wall in the center of the hall, "is the place for the newest acquisition. The mayor's last work. Pity he wasn't an artist, but his collection of Chinese paintings is itself a work of art. And the centerpiece, a Ming Dynasty scroll depicting an emperor's death, will be the jewel of this hall." Christina took a small silver case from her bag. "I brought what you requested," she said, "your stimulant." Klein's eyes lit with unhealthy gleam. "Superb," he extended his hand. "Lately the effect has been weakening. I need a stronger dose." "I've created a new formula." Christina opened the case, showing a vial of clear liquid. "Much more intense. It will open new facets of art perception for you." I observed this exchange, understanding the true dynamics of their relationship. Klein wasn't the master, he was an addict, dependent on compounds Christina created, and she used this dependency to control him. "Allow me to prepare the injection." Christina took out a syringe. "Please sit down." Klein lowered himself into an antique chair, rolling up his sleeve. On his forearm were visible traces of numerous injections, evidence of long-term dependency. While Christina prepared the injection, I examined the room, pretending to look for the best angle for photography. The security system here was even more complex. Additional cameras, motion sensors, some special panels in the walls whose purpose I couldn't determine. "This is a special place," noted Klein, watching me. "Not just a gallery. This is my ark of immortality. Art here is protected from all threats, fires, floods, time. In case of danger, a special conservation protocol activates." "Conservation?" I asked, continuing to study the room. "Oxygen is displaced by inert gas, temperature lowered to a point stopping all degradation processes," he explained proudly. "Art here can be preserved for centuries, untouched by time." Christina approached him with the syringe. "Ready?" she smiled. "This dose will give you unforgettable sensations." Klein offered his arm, and she inserted the needle into a vein, slowly pressing the plunger. His face almost instantly relaxed, his eyes clouded. "Divine," he whispered. "I see, colors becoming alive." Christina stepped back, observing him with the cold interest of a scientist. "The effect will increase over several minutes," she said quietly. "Then respiratory system paralysis will begin. In an hour he'll be dead." I looked at her with surprise. So this was her plan, to eliminate Klein today as well. "Are you sure?" I asked. "He could be useful." "He became unpredictable," Christina shook her head, demanding increasingly prominent names for his collection. Governors, senators. We can't risk it. Meanwhile, Klein was sinking into a narcotic trance, muttering something about paints and lines. He no longer perceived the reality around him. "We need to find the safe with documents," continued Christina. "It must be somewhere here. All evidence of our collaboration needs to be destroyed." I nodded and began methodically searching the room. The safe was discovered behind a painting, a classic solution, almost cliché. Opening it using skills acquired in special forces took just a few minutes. Inside lay folders with documents, detailed descriptions of each assignment, victim photographs, financial reports, an entire archive of crimes committed by Christina on Klein's orders, or, as it now turned out, on her own initiative. "Find anything interesting?" Christina's voice sounded tense. I turned, holding a folder marked Project Chameleon. "What is this?" She approached, glanced at the folder, and tensed. "Nothing important, an old project." I opened the folder, ignoring her protest. Inside were photographs of me, pictures from my military service, documents about my past, even a psychological profile compiled after my return from the last deployment. "What does this mean, Christina?" My voice became dangerously quiet. She hesitated, clearly deciding which version to present. "This is Klein's insurance," she finally said. "In case you might suspect something, information for blackmail." But I saw in her eyes what I had already understood from the documents. It wasn't Klein who collected information about me. She did it herself. "Don't lie to me." I shut the folder. "Project Chameleon was developed before we met. You deliberately sought a former military man with a specific psychological profile. Someone with PTSD, with an acute sense of justice, with a need to protect." Christina straightened, abandoning pretense. "Fine, yes, I needed an ally, cover, a person whose background wouldn't raise questions if something went wrong. Our marriage was part of the plan." I felt something cold spreading inside. "All these 7 years. At first, yes, she didn't avert her gaze. You were the perfect candidate, loyal, reliable, with an impeccable reputation. No one would ever suspect a war hero's wife. I looked at the woman I had lived with for 7 years and saw before me a complete stranger. And then, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Then, everything changed. She took a step toward me. I didn't plan to become attached to you, Jason. It was a weakness, a mistake, but I truly, she faltered, I loved you in my own way. In your own way, I repeated bitterly. Enough to use me for 7 years, but not enough to trust me with the truth. Somewhere in the background, Klein began to choke. The poison's effect was intensifying. But we both ignored him, completely focused on each other. I couldn't risk it. Notes of desperation appeared in Christina's voice. You wouldn't have understood, with your ideas of honor duty. And now, I interrupted, why did you decide to tell the truth now? Because you uncovered everything yourself, she shrugged. And because now I need a real partner, not a puppet but an equal, someone who will share my mission of their own free will. Klein made a final gasp and went silent. Christina didn't even glance in his direction. So, Jason, she extended her hand, are you still with me despite the truth? I looked at her hand, at the face I had seen every morning at breakfast for 7 years, and realized I had always been merely an instrument. First for the government, then for her. What if I say no? I asked, stepping back. Her face became harder, colder. Then you and I will be on opposite sides, she pointed to the dead Klein. And you remember how it ends for those against me. Are you threatening me, Christina? Stating facts, she again became that detached, calculating woman I had seen in the studio. I would prefer you to stay with me, but I can't allow you to interfere with my work. I felt my military training taking over, mind disengaged emotions, body tensed, ready for action. And the work will continue, I asked, discreetly assessing the distance to the door. After the mayor and Klein, there will be new victims. Of course, Christina smirked. The world is full of monsters hiding behind respectable facades. My mission is only beginning. She approached a wall and pressed a hidden panel. Part of the floor slid away, revealing a small elevator. This is Klein's real studio, she explained. The place where he kept his most valuable exhibits, those that no one was ever supposed to see. We descended to a spacious room with mirrored walls and special lighting, but instead of paintings there were people, or what had once been people. Dozens of bodies, perfectly preserved in transparent cylinders filled with some liquid. Each body was arranged in an artistic pose, like a terrible parody of sculpture. God, I exhaled, recognizing some faces from photographs in Christina's album. His real collection, she said with disgust. Not just art created before death, but the creators themselves, preserved forever in the moment of their final creative act. I turned to her. You knew about this? Found out recently, she shook her head. Another reason why Klein had to disappear. He crossed all boundaries. Suddenly, I noticed that in the center of the room stood an empty cylinder, ready to receive a new exhibit. Who is this for? I asked, though I already knew the answer. For Klein, replied Christina. The final exhibit in his own collection. Ironic, don't you think? She approached a control panel and pressed several buttons. A mechanical arm descended from above, ready to transport the body. Help me move him, she said. You're stronger than I am. I didn't move. And what then, Christina? After we make Klein an exhibit in his own horror museum. We'll destroy this collection, she answered, not looking at me. Bury the bodies, close the gallery, and then continue my mission, together, on my terms. On your terms, I repeated slowly. Always on your terms. Something in my voice made her turn. Our gazes met, and I saw understanding in her eyes. I wasn't going to become her new puppet. Jason, she took a step toward me. Don't complicate things. We can make the world better together. Better? I shook my head. You've created your own death cult, Christina. You're no better than those you kill. Her face contorted with rage. I'm not like them. I bring justice. These people deserve death. Not for you to decide, I replied firmly. You're not judge, jury, or executioner. You're just another monster. She looked at me, and in her eyes the last hope for understanding slowly died. So that's how it is, she said quietly. You've chosen a side. Her hand darted to her pocket, and I reacted instinctively. Years of training didn't go to waste. I caught her wrist, twisted it, heard the dull thud of a syringe falling to the floor. Don't do this, Christina, I warned. Instead of answering, she attacked, unexpectedly quickly and professionally. Knee strike, attempted grab, spin. Not amateur movements, but precise combat technique. Where did you learn this? I asked, blocking the attack. You can't work with dangerous people without knowing how to defend yourself, she exhaled, trying to hit me in the solar plexus. We circled around the room among cylinders with bodies, like in some nightmare dance. She was good, very good for a civilian, but I spent 14 years in an elite unit, and my body remembered what no training program could dream of. I took initiative, driving her to the wall. She retreated, snarling with precise but insufficiently powerful strikes. Surrender, Christina, I said when I had her cornered. I don't want to hurt you. She laughed, a wild, almost hysterical laugh. Too late, Jason. Too late for both of us. Her hand darted to a panel on the wall, and I couldn't react in time. She hit the red button, and the room was filled with a piercing siren wail. Conservation protocol activated, announced a mechanical voice from speakers. You have 30 seconds to evacuate. 29, 28. What have you done? I rushed to the elevator door, but it was already locked. Eternity together, darling. Christina was smiling, but tears stood in her eyes. Isn't that what all married couples dream of? There must be an emergency exit. I frantically examined the room. No exit, Christina shook her head. The protocol is designed to preserve the collection at any cost, even if people remain inside. The air in the room began to change, becoming denser, colder. I felt the first signs of hypoxia. Why? I looked into her eyes. Why did you choose death for us both? Because I can't let you go. Her voice contained sincerity for the first time in our entire conversation. And I can't allow you to stop me. This is a compromise. I felt my limbs growing heavy, movement slowing. The effect of inert gas displacing oxygen. 15 seconds until complete conservation. The impassive voice continued counting. Gathering my last strength, I lunged toward Christina and grabbed her shoulders. You were better than this, I exhaled. Somewhere deep inside, you were capable of good. She looked at me with foggy eyes, her pupils dilated from oxygen deprivation. I loved you, she whispered. For real, it wasn't part of the plan. 5 seconds, 4, 3. In the last moment before losing consciousness, I pressed Christina to me and kissed her, like on the day we exchanged vows. For a second, it seemed she responded, sincerely, without pretense. And then darkness fell. The rescue team found us several days later. An anonymous call led police to the abandoned gallery, where they discovered Klein's body upstairs and the sealed basement with the collection below. Too late for Christina. The conservation system worked flawlessly. Her body was preserved in perfect condition, but her brain died from hypoxia minutes before the preservative filled the room. I survived thanks to a special implanted oxygen capsule, standard equipment for high-risk operations in my unit. It was enough to keep the brain from damage during the critical minutes before complete conservation. When I was extracted and revived, I told everything about the chromatic club, the poisonous paints, the collector and his victims, about the woman who began as an instrument of vengeance and turned into what she fought against. Newspapers called it the death artist case. The story made front pages, shocked the city, ruined reputations. Mayor Hedges survived. He was saved thanks to my testimony, which allowed the prompt administration of an antidote. However, his prison sentence for human trafficking guaranteed he wouldn't see freedom for the rest of his life. The bodies of Klein's victims were identified and returned to families for proper burial. His last masterpieces collection became the center of a scandal in the art world. As for me, I received immunity in exchange for full cooperation, returned to work as a survival instructor, once again teaching people to stay alive in extreme conditions. Sometimes at night, I still see Christina, not the one who plotted murders and manipulated people, but the one who laughed at breakfast and kissed me as she left for work. I don't know if any part of our life together was real. Perhaps the truth died with her in that basement. But in those rare moments when I allow myself to think of her, I want to believe that her last kiss was sincere. That somewhere deep inside the monster who killed dozens of people, there still lived a woman capable of genuine love. Perhaps it's self-deception, another illusion like our entire marriage. But it's the only thing that helps me go on living. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.